Hi everyone, Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, here with a very special preview of this weekend's Lake Placid and Alabama Stakes. But before we get to that with my very special guest, want to make sure that you press that like button on YouTube, as well as subscribe to the new NYRA Bets YouTube channel, where you can get race previews, full card analyses. Listen, you can get live streams. We have a lot of fun with those on a weekly basis. We have educational handicapping and betting tutorials, so much different content, and not just about New York. In fact, we have some race previews for some of the big races taking place up at Woodbine this week with the King's Plate. So a lot of different content across the country. Want to make sure to subscribe to NYRA Bets YouTube. Well, like I said, we're going to be focused on, for this video, the Saturday stakes races at Saratoga. And those are, of course, the Lake Placid and the Alabama. The Alabama, notably, a race that Thorpedo Anna is skipping. And as a result, feels like a pretty wide open race. Here to join me is, you know him from Saratoga Live and America's Day at the Races, and that is former jockey Rajiv Maragh. Rajiv, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me about these two races today.
Oh, good morning. Thanks. I'm happy to be here. Happy to talk with you guys about the race.
Awesome. Well, let's dive right into it. We have two of the races on the card. We'll start with the Lake Placid, which is a grade 2 going a mile and a 16th for 3-year-old fillies on the inner turf course. Is a field of 11. There are 3 MTOs. Looks like the weather should be relatively good, so I don't think we'll have to worry about that. Your morning line favorite is the number 7. She Feels Pretty, coming off a third place finish last time out in the Belmont Oaks, which was, I thought, a very impressive effort. She's a filly that's only lost twice, and those 2 losses were by less than a length both times.
Yeah.
So always been right around it. Rajiv, looking at her, you know, she certainly looks like a pretty formidable favorite in this field. What are your thoughts on that and kind of how this field shakes out a little bit?
Yeah, I do agree. She's a formidable favorite. She's going to be my top pick in the race. I just feel like the cutback in distance is what makes it good for her. In her most recent race, she raced at a mile and 3/16, which is the longest distance she's ever been. And one of the things that happened in that race is the pace didn't develop as much, and she was a lot closer to the pace. And that being she's closer to the pace, it kind of impacted her usual stretch run. I feel like she's a filly that's best when she sits back off a pace and makes one sharp run, because she has a pretty explosive turn of foot. And cutting back to the mile and 16, there's a lot more speeding in this race today. The pace is going to develop in front of her. She's going to be allowed to settle back into her preferred running style and just make one explosive kick. And just pretty straightforward, cut and dry, that she is the best horse in the race, and she's going to get the dynamics that she wants.
Yeah, you bring up a great point about the cutback in distance, cutting back a furlong from that last time out. And, you know, she, with Johnny Velasquez aboard, you're right, was really close to that lead last time out, and really gave a lot coming down the stretch. Obviously, Cinderella's Dream, who we've seen go on to win yet another stakes race after this, is such an impressive filly for Charlie Appleby. But she really fought on with Sagesta in that race for second and third. And in this race, presumably the number 8, Ori, is going to be kind of a horse that maybe serves as a little bit of a rabbit, gets out there up front and really sets a pretty strong pace, as well as Christophe Clement's first-time North American starter, Les Reyes. That's a horse that, you know, is really stretching out from, sprinting at 6.5 furlongs 2 races ago, and is, maybe going to be a horse that's a little bit more forward. There are a couple of others in this race. Interestingly enough, we do have a Charlie Appleby horse in this race making its first-time North American debut, and that's the number 11, Beautiful Love. Typically in these turf races, we always start with Charlie Appleby because he tends to always have the favorite in these spots. But I found it curious that his typical first call here in North America, Flavian Pratt, is staying aboard Grayosh for Chad Brown, and he's going to Manny Franco for a horse that, doesn't really fit the typical Appleby profile. Beautiful Love's a horse that's come over, really just has kind of an allowance win, and is not one of these kind of monsters that we tend to see him come over, but certainly might get overbet simply because of the connections and it being Charlie Appleby.
Yeah, so let's touch on a couple of things that you said. For me, Leray, the Christophe Clement runner, I get that she was running overseas at shorter distance, so she possesses that natural speed. I just kind of have experience riding for those connections over the years and what Christoph likes to do. He's not the kind of guy that wants to bring a horse over here first time in the country and chase the pace and fade. That would be like the last thing that he would want to see. So reading between those lines, I really expect them to try to get this one some cover early and make one run and use it. This is a big race for them, and I'm sure that they want to win the race, but ultimately they want to do it the right way because they're probably looking at more like this isn't the race defining moment of the horse's career. So I wouldn't expect that one to be chasing the pace, right? But I do expect that, like you said, number 8, Ori, to have a lot of natural speed. This one wired the field by 3 lengths early and just kept on going in a much lower level. But at least she's going to ensure that there's pace in the race. So very important that horse, if that horse scratches, then that might change the whole dynamics of the race. So moving on to number 11, Beautiful Love, the Charlie Appleby runner. I also wouldn't read too much into the jockey not being Flavien Prat, because Flavien, he rides mainly for Chad Brown when he has the opportunities to. If Charlie Appleby had horses in the race and Chad Brown had a top contender, I believe he would have to ride for Chad Brown because he rides for Chad Brown year round here in America. But the times that he's been riding for Charlie Appleby was either A, he didn't have a top contender to ride for Chad Brown who didn't have a horse in the race, or B, Chad Brown had a horse in the race, but it was someone else's mount, like say Carl Spackler. It's also entirely Gaffley owned. So I wouldn't read into the jockey thing too much. I think that horse has a tough outside post, and I do agree with you. When I'm looking for horses coming from Europe, I'm looking for the ones that are running at the high level, the graded stakes and stuff like that. And she seems to me that she's even in the UAE, she was running at a lower level than what we compete with these horses. But 2 starts back, in February 2nd, she was second behind Cinderella's Dream, beating 2.5 lengths.
Yeah, no, you bring up a good point about being right behind Cinderella's Dream, that start 2 back. And obviously we mentioned her as a really, really impressive filly who we've gotten to see a couple of times up here in New York, both at Aqueduct and now at Saratoga. This race, obviously does feature a couple of Chad Brown runners. I mentioned Grayosh as one of them with Flavien Prat aboard, but you also see a horse like number 5, Spaladay, with Frankie Dettori aboard, coming off a win in the Boiling Springs at Monmouth Park, as well as the number 10, Dynamic Pricing, with Irad Ortiz Jr. aboard. Now, Irad serving a 3-day suspension early this week. I have a feeling he's going to want to get back and get in the winner's circle and make sure he keeps padding that jockey's standings a little bit and make sure Flavien doesn't catch up too much while he's out. But again, a difficult post position from that post position 10. And, I'm curious, as a former jockey, Rajiv, when you're with a horse in that sort of outside post position, 11 or 10, 11, and you have a horse like Dynamic Pricing that has, some maybe tactical speed, but really not a lot. Kind of what's your plan to try to save ground going into that first turn to give that horse maybe the best chance to win?
So the best thing that you can, if the pace is slow going into the turn, the problem is the field will bunch up. And when the field bunches up, there's less opportunities or less gaps to file in because everyone is just together. So the only way that you can really get to the rail from then is either you take back and drop to the back of the pack and get to the rail because there's no gaps in between the pack, or you have to, that's pretty much the only way when it's a slow pace. So the one thing that you can control from the outside as a jockey is forcing the pace to be faster. So there is separation in the pack, and then you can drop in. That is the best way when you're riding a horse from the outside to actually ensure that you get a good spot going in the turn. So what I would do if I'm trying to get over is break and actually hustle my mount forward. That way, if the pace doesn't develop and everyone is holding and the race bunches up, you don't have to take back to last to get to the rail. You can actually go to the front and get to the rail. Right, so it's very important to get to the rail. The double-edged sword about that is sometimes when you're riding horses that are definitive closers, you'll be taking them out of their game to go to the lead. So he's going to be threading a fine line of trying to get over to the rail, not overusing his mounts. And so the right way to do that is actually break sharp, get the horse running at a good pace to ensure that they have to push to keep up with you, and then try to pick a spot that a gap opens. He's going to be scouting his left a lot to see where it is. And then as that moment arises, he makes a sharp turn to the left to try to get over. It's really tough. It's it's a very intricate way of riding, but that's what I expect Irad to do.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great point. And to your point earlier, really the key to the race is the number 8 Ori. If that horse scratches, then that completely changes the dynamic. If that horse stays in the race, then that's the speed. And you would imagine that Ori, with Kendrick Carmouche aboard in particular, is going to get out there and go. And that might help, to your point, just draw out the field a little bit more and allow for there to be maybe some more gaps for a horse like Dynamic Pricing or even Beautiful Love to slide over and be, if not on the rail, at least in the 2-path and a little bit, save a little bit of ground.
Yeah, Ori is crucial to the dynamics of the race. Without her in the race, the race changes a lot. And I don't necessarily ever premeditate that a horse is going to scratch or even bring up that relevance. But why I brought that up into this situation is she's 50-1 on the morning line. And we know that trainers and connections are allowed to scratch from stake races at no penalty. So, when you pick up the form and you see that you're 50-1, it might take away some of your confidence. And, I'm not saying that the horse is going to scratch, but, I can see if they did. And then if they did, then that changes the whole complexion of what we're talking about. So it's just important to note. But I also want to touch on a long shot in here.
Yeah, please do.
Galabrand. So this would be my sneaky long shot coming into the race. And here's the reason. Last year at Saratoga, this filly started her career spectacularly, right? She won her debut, and then in her second race, Hall of Fame trainer Bill Mudd, a guy that's pretty conservative, right? He felt like he had pocket aces here because he went and he put her in against the boys in the with anticipation, and she won like a superstar. Really, she won by 2 3/4 lengths in a race that has aged so well. The runner-up to her in that race is none other than Carson's Run, who recently won our Saratoga Derby last week, Grade 1. So it's, she has the talent. And ever since those 2 races, she has been so unlucky for numerous reasons. Unlucky starts in tough races, having tough trips. She hasn't had the most favorable setup in any of her races. So her form is pretty dirtied up. And I feel like she is this quality of filly, right? Because she's already won at the graded stake level. And many of the horses here, ultimately, I picked She Feels Pretty as a top pick because I feel like she's just a class of the class. She's a proven graded stakes top caliber filly, right? Most of the horses in this race are trying to find their identity. Where do they stack up against this level of competition? They deserve the opportunity to show what they got, but it isn't clear cut as yet where they stack up. So there's a lot of horses that have won maiden races or allowance races, shown that quality, but they're trying to really feel where they stack up. Whereas like the Galabrands and the She Feels Pretty, we know they're graded stakes caliber horses.
That's a great point that you bring up, that about a lot of these horses coming into the race, you're right, they've gotten a maiden win, they've gotten an allowance win, maybe they've gotten a listed stakes win. This is kind of their first crack at a graded stake. And you're right, kind of figuring out the pecking order, if you will, of this 3-year-old turf class for the fillies is going to be kind of interesting to see. And Galabrand, I remember that race last year. I was so excited to see her run against the boys. And you're right, Bill Mott, a very conservative trainer, does not put his horses in a bad position ever. We just saw that recently with a horse like Arthur's Ride, who of course won the Whitney, stepping up into class, but doing it pretty confidently. The one horse that I'll mention that I was a little bit interested in and is going to have to overcome post position is the number 9 Proctor Street at 8-1. I just always like Brendan Walsh and Tyler Gaffleon when they team up. They're formidable on the turf. And this one is a deep closer, though, is going to be a little bit more pace dependent. So that's something to keep in mind, depending on if there is a scratch or how pace dynamics change. It really is a horse that's going to make one gigantic run from the back Tyler, I thought, has been riding really well the last couple of weeks up here on the turf. And this is one who, again, we're going to see where she fits in this group because she's coming up and off of 2 consecutive victories in her 2 career starts, a maiden and an optional claimer up here earlier this summer. So interested to see her, but I think a really fun field. And like you said, she feels pretty, listen, she looks like the top pick in this race. But like you said, if Ori scratches or if there's a change in the pace dynamic, then that maybe changes things. And maybe somebody can try to steal this thing up on the front end if they're just kind of aggressive out of the gate. If Ori, like you said, maybe doesn't run. So fun race, but let's go to the headliner, which is the Alabama Grade 1 going 1.25 miles on the dirt for 3-year-old fillies. And, the field of 8 is as defined by who is not there as who is there. Of course, Thorpedo Anna running against the boys in the Travers next week. But I feel like, Rajiv, that made this race a little bit more fun because now you have a bunch of fillies who are all kind of taking their shot at a Grade 1, and they don't have to worry about the big bad wolf, Thorpedo Anna, who's been just beating everybody in this division now. So I'm excited about this race.
Yeah, I mean, let's be real. If Thorpedo Anna was in this race, it would be all but a formality. And so it does give opportunity for others. The funny thing is, and I'm going to be really blunt about this, I feel like Candied is a Thorpedo Anna against her rivals in this race. I think she just way the horse to beat. And the only I'm trying to find, when I see a favorite, I'm trying to find a reason to beat them, right? I look at the vulnerabilities with pace dynamics or anything like that. And with this one, and in any case, when I can't find a reason to beat them, I just zone in on them and be like, okay, I'm making this, like, this horse is winning. And I'm on a betting standpoint, I'm going to just single in every way and just put no alternatives, just straight up Candied to win the race. Now, the only equalizing factor I can see is the unknown of the 1.25 miles. Only one filly in this race has ever ran at 1.25 miles, right? And that's just Baskets. I think everyone else is trying it for the first time. So that would be the one thing that I would say maybe could affect Candied, but that is just speculating that she's not going to love it, because she could also relish the 1.25 miles. So I'm not going to hold that against her, that she's never raced at 1.25 miles, because the races are just not made that way. There's not many 1.25 miles at this level offered to these fillies. So I'm just going to say Candied is going to win because she ran such a great race last time. Chasing Thorpedo Anna. So they wanted her to have a shot to win or run her best race. So what happened is Thorpedo Anna is in front of her, and she's trying to keep up with her and moving early at her to stay within range, which I don't blame them. I would want to win as well. But what that does is, at the end of the day, puts you in chase mode. You're burning the gas, chasing your shadow. And Thorpedo Anna was just too much. She doesn't have to chase a horse like that today. She's going to be able to get into a good rhythm and be on the bridle, just taking her jockey around the track, and have a lot left for the stretch run.
Yeah, it's an interesting race because there's not a lot of speed in this race. You'd imagine a horse like number 2, Chattelis, is going to be forward, as well as the number 6, Miss Justify. Both of Miss Justify in particular stretching out from 1 mile. But Miss Justify is not a need to lead type of horse. I mean, it has one kind of tracking the pace. And so while she's stretching out, she's not in here just to set things up for other horses, even though she's another Todd Pletcher runner. And Chattelis, listen, that was a really gutsy effort winning that Indiana Oaks last time. I went back and watched that race a couple of times. That was like
by everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a little bit like Dornick, where she got past and then she came right back and kind of put her head back in front and got down at the wire. And Brad Cox's very ballyhooed filly Impel really didn't fire that day, or didn't run quite as good of a race as they had hoped. And so I do give Chattelis a lot of credit. Again, stretching out to 1.25 miles, I think it's a little bit of a question mark, for her. And Miss Justify, I think I agree with everything you said about Candied. If she runs that race like she did two back at the Lady Secret, like this thing's over, and it's just academic. But Miss Justify, I think, is the most interesting alternative, just because yes, she's trying the distance, but she should be pretty close and just kind of tracking that pace of Chattelis. And that one, at least at 6-1, maybe gives you a little bit of value. And we'll just see. A lot of this field is kind of mid-pack and kind of closers, so there's not a lot of early speed necessarily to press horses like Chattelis and Miss Justify.
And I will say this: when the toughest part about figuring this race out is figuring out who's gonna advance or relish the mile and a quarter, and who's it gonna impact, right? Because there's insufficient data. These horses have not run at a mile and a quarter, so there's a couple of factors that will give you some indication of what to expect. So I'll give you the three factors. Factor number one is the size of the horse. So bigger, leggier, scopy kind of horses, they're not that quick and agile and nimble on their feet. They're usually steady pace horses that like to go a long distance. They just have one pace, but they can sustain it over a distance of time. So you kind of want to see if you can see the physical frame. We're not seeing that today. We're not going to see that until race day. Pedigree, we use some kind of pedigree factors, the siblings, what was the average distance that they ran? And if you can look into that, were they classic kind of horses or they come from sprint pedigree? Usually that would translate to distance as well. But one of the things that we can see now is using visual cues of thinking what horse is going to get the distance. Trying to figure out that kind of horse that has that steady pace. So when you look back at a horse like Chattelis, right, she has speed. But one thing about her speed is she sustains it. And that's one of the reasons why she looked like she was beat the last time, but she ended up re-rallying. I don't think she accelerated. I think what she did was she got to the lead. She was running a very honest clip, a very, very good pace. Her rivals ranged up on her with that quick acceleration that she doesn't have. So they seemed like they were going to go by her. Then they started fading because they have a quick acceleration, but only for a short run, a short period of time. When they started fading, and it made her look like she was finding another gear, which she wasn't. She was just maintaining and sustaining her pace, which at a mile and a quarter, that's actually a good indicator that a horse wants more distance. Because if she's able to clip off those fractions and sustain it, she can be deadly using that speed and just going all the way.
Yeah, no, you bring up a good point. And we should mention that start in the Indiana Oaks was the first start for her in nearly 7 months. And so this was off the bench. She was running, 23-3, 47-2 fractions. And to your point, it reminded me a little bit of Batten Down in the Ohio Derby, where that horse just kind of got out up front, was running fast fractions just for the sake of running fast fractions. It wasn't as if another horse was hounding Batten Down in that race. And just like in the Indiana Oaks, nobody was really pressing Chattelis. She was just going fast up front. And that's a great point about her just kind of, this is just her pace. And she just runs that way. And other people try to make their run and then fade back a little bit. And she just keeps going. She could be dangerous up on the front end if nobody really presses her and she's able to get comfortable. And we've seen it plenty of times up here where a horse just gets brave on the front end. And, sometimes the track on big days also tends to favor speed a little bit. And you never know. I mean, you could certainly see that sort of gate to wire upset in this spot.
Yeah, I mean, and so I expect them to definitely utilize that speed. They're not going to come to the Alabama grade 1 and then try something new. You got to play the hand you're dealt at that point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I will just, to punctuate a point that you made about pedigree, I think it is telling that in this race, there are 2 gun runners, 2 Arrogates, a Justify, and a Candied ride. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know about, like, these are horses that are bred for distance. Those are all very big sire influences for dirt route races. And obviously, looking at the dam pedigree underneath the half siblings, like you said, also very important. But I think it's notable that you see those really big time dirt sires in there.
Yeah, and as much as I am, picking Candied and talking about the distance, she's the one that actually has the most vulnerable pedigree when you talk about distance. She's by Candy Ride, right? But her mare Tony Tools was a New York bred that pretty much is, sprinted most of her career as her main
Right.
success. And so that there isn't much pedigree there for this. It doesn't show much. And then she only has one sibling who's raced twice in her life, and one time was at a mile where she won. So, the pedigree page doesn't stand out on her, but she's just, I'm not going to use that against her because she showed that she's the best in her family. And sometimes that happens.
Yeah.
But you look at a horse like Just Baskin, that's you talk about the arrogant, definitely a classic, a stallion, and out of a blame mare. So it's expected that she'll love the distance as well.
No, she's one who, is really interesting. You brought up, she's the only one, her and Neon Icon both have run at a mile and a quarter. She broke her maiden going a mile and a quarter at Churchill Downs. Obviously, coming off a big effort last time out in the Iowa Oaks. Chris Landeros actually is flying in for this mount. That's been her jockey the last couple of times. And I think it's noteworthy that her best effort was that last time out in the Iowa Oaks. And that was her first time off Lasix. And you saw a huge bump in her Beyer speed figures from kind of mid 70s to suddenly a 90. Now, obviously, the level of competition she's going to be facing is going to increase pretty dramatically. That was only a 5-horse field, and she's a horse that likes to come from off the pace a little bit, but she handled that group no problem at all. 5-1. It'll be an interesting class test, and I'll be interested to see what her odds are come post time, because I can imagine more well-known connections up here in New York, whether it's, Miss Justify with Todd Pletcher, or even perhaps Power Squeeze with Jorge Delgado, or Intricate with Brendan Walsh, might attract a little bit more money rather than a horse coming in from Prairie Meadows for a trainer that maybe a lot of New Yorkers aren't quite as familiar with as Timothy Ham. So, or Ian Wilkes, I should say. So it'll be interesting to see, how the betting ends up playing out in this spot. But
I think we should touch on one more, because Intricate is the only filly to have ever beat Thorpedo Anna, and she was such a good 2-year-old, winning the Golden Rod by 5 lengths and looking like top of her class, and she really hasn't advanced on that as a 3-year-old. But she might be one that is going to appreciate the mile and a quarter based on her running style. She's just been steady, grinding her gears in her most recent races. So, I expect a better performance from her. And I know that people are going to be looking at her and using that Thorpedo Anna race from from last year and saying, well, she's the only one that beat Thorpedo Anna. Thorpedo Anna isn't in this race. And I would just say I have mixed feelings about her. I feel like she's going to get back into one of her better races at a distance. She's got a great inside post. Got Tyler Gaffleone and Brendan Welch. Tyler is the hottest jockey in the world right now. I mean, he won 25% of our races at Saratoga last week. So, I think I can see people that are taking her and people that are not. I like her underneath a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. No, feels a little, in some ways, there's maybe a little bit of a parallel to a horse we talked about earlier with regard to Galibrand, a horse that really showed a lot as a 2-year-old, and maybe, in Galibrand's case, I think sometimes it was a little unlucky in some of these races more recently. In Intricate's case, I don't know if she's quite been good enough to take that step forward from 2 to 3, but certainly has shown potential and has shown ability. And so, there's something in there. And if at a little bit of a price, like you said, going to save a lot of ground, sired by Gun Runner, should appreciate every inch of this distance and has that sort of running style. So should be a really fun one on Saturday. Can't wait for it. Rajiv, I appreciate you joining me again. And let the good folks know at home, when are you going to be on Saratoga Live this week? Do you know your schedule? Are you going to be on Saturday at all?
I'm going to be on only for the 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. on Saturday.
Okay.
I got the graveyard on Saturday after the big races. But yeah, I'll be on today. Mostly I do the earlier segments. That's usually where I'm at.
Awesome. Well, very good. Well, Rajiv, like I said, thank you again for coming on. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for watching this episode of NYRA Bets YouTube, our preview of the Lake Placid and Alabama for Rajiv Maragh. My name is Matthew DeSantis. Wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races, and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.